Hey, this is the Algebra Teacher Goes BI with another demo here for you. I wanted to move into bookmarks. We've been working with, for a few of my demonstrations, I've been working with some display, data on grade books as a teacher, how they could use them, how they could make their students see the data in real life and what it's actually meaning. And so now what I want to show is some bookmarks that can, make your reports a little bit more user interactive, so to speak. So let's just start off with something basic of how we would normally set up a report. So let's say I wanted to see my data based on all of my students' first period and then also second period. So one thing I would start with is I would set up a slicer because I know I'm going to want to slice my data out by periods. And so we're going to have this basic slicer up here. I'm just going to change it to a list. So I have first period and second period. So that's going to let me filter down my results once I put them in here. And I'm going to do one real quick visual. I'm going to make a clustered column chart over here. And I want to see the grades broken down by the assignment categories that I have. And so I've got 3 different categories of assignments. And so I'm going to put that in here. So assignment category. And then I want to see it based on the student averages. And so this was a calculation, a very simple one, just averaging the columns where these are located. And so what we've got here is my 3 categories of homework, quiz, and test. And that just gives me a real quick overview of what category my students are doing the best in, where do I have the highest averages, and then where do I have the lowest averages, which is fine. And if I start clicking on first period, this gets filtered down just to first period averages. And then if I go to second period, we see it's not a big difference, but there was a little bit of difference between first and second period, which is nice. So I'm going to hit the eraser up here to clear all the selections. And now let's say I want to see more details. I want to see my actual students, like the averages next to their names. And so what I'm going to do is going to add in a table visual right here and make sure I don't have my slicer selected. So in my table visual, which I'm just going to bring up here, we'll put it right next to it. Go right here, make this down a little bit more. And I want to put into this one, I want to put in the student's name. And I also want to bring in what period I have them. Now, normally I would not put the period, but this is going to be for validation purposes for when we show our bookmarks. And I want to put in their basic student average, as well as I want to bring in the assignment category. So now I see, for example, up here, just so we know what the data is looking like. So I see Beatrice, who is in my second period class. Her homework averages are 97, her quiz averages are 64, and her test averages are 63.33. So these are not all of her assignments. These are all been filtered down based on the categories that we put each assignment into. Okay, so again, now let's go back to our slicer over here. If I hit onto first period, once it thinks and goes through, I see only first period students. And these are only the first period averages for each assignment. And again, if I go to second period, again, we would see second period only, right? So the slicer is perfect. The slicer works. But if we want to make this just a little bit more, user-friendly or more like a web experience, we can use the power of bookmarks. And so that's what I want to show you today. So this was all just the generic setup. Now we can get into the bookmarks themselves. In order to use bookmarks, the first thing you're going to have to use are 2 more panes. Right here we've got the filters, the visualizations, and the fields pane. We also need a selection and the bookmarks pane. And where you will find those at is in the top in your view ribbon. Over here for the show panes, we are also going to click on our bookmarks pane and our selection pane. Okay, so I'm not going to be needing to use the filters pane for this demonstration, so I'm just going to collapse this down to save a little bit more real estate here on our screen. And the whole idea of what a bookmark does is it saves a snapshot of time of how the data looked, of what your selections were. And in order to do that, I'm going to walk you through some of the best practices that I think are good for this. And one of the things is, I'm going to want to have two separate images or two separate buttons that will take me to first period and then take me also to second period. So I'm going to get rid of the slicer, which this would work with the slicer, but just showing you how bookmarks work so that you can take advantage of them for whatever scenario that you may be presented with. So what I'm going to do is put in here, I'm going to go to my insert ribbon, and once I'm on the insert ribbon, I could put in a button, I could put in a shape, or I can put in an image to act as a bookmark. So I'm going to show you two of these today. I'm going to show you how we can use images, and I'm also going to show you how we can use the button. So to first start off, I'm going to put in an image. And this can be any image that I've downloaded. So I've come up with two things up here that I got off of Google Images. So I found a nice looking one here. So that's going to be the button I want or the image I want my end user to select in order to see just first period results. So I'm just going to move this up here. And it might not look pretty in the end, but instead of wasting too much time making everything look beautiful and pretty, let's just get down to the nitty gritty. So I've got my first period button in, and now I'm going to bring in first period image. Sorry, it looks like a button, but it is an image. Now I'm going to bring in my second period. And in it comes. All right, great. So these are going to be what my end goal is I want when somebody clicks on first, I want them to see all of this data filtered down by first, just like the slicer. When they hit second, I want it to be all second. But then there's another thing is, well, what if I want to go back to the original and see all of my students at once? So this time I'm going to use an actual button instead for this bookmark action, so to speak. So I'm going to click on buttons. I'm going to come down here to the blank one, because with the blank one I can type in what I want it to say. So I'm just going to go with blank, and it's going to come on in, and it's going to populate up here in the upper left, and I want it to be here above the other one. So I'm just maneuvering this, making it a little bit bigger by dragging and dropping. Now what I want this one to do is give me the view of all of my students, not filtered down by any period. So I need to give it some text here. So what I've done is I have the button selected. I'm going to come over to the fields pane, the visualizations pane, and where it says button text, I'm going to turn that to on. And when I do that, now I have these options to put in what I want the text to say. And so for what I want it to say in the default state when nothing has been selected is all students. And if we take a look over here, it is populated with all students. Now I can get a little bit more fancy with it. I can change the font color of it. I can change the text size up a little bit. So let's make it a little bit larger. Okay, looks good enough for now. And there's more things you can do in terms of button text, which I will talk about in future demonstrations, in terms of the states that it has based on hovering, pressing, and being disabled. But for today's demonstration, this is going to be perfect. So we're going to leave that there. All right, so now the next piece. We've got the buttons in that we want. The next part is what I consider one of the most important parts that's often overlooked is your selection pane. Now, if we look at this selection pane, some of these things can be misconstrued of what object goes to what, because every time you add an object to your report page, it shows up here on the selection pane. But sometimes it can be hard to realize which visual matches with which wording. So what I like to do is I like to hide everything first. And so what the selection pane is doing is not deleting anything, but when you hit the eye icon for everything that you're at, once this catches up to me, it's catching up, don't worry, is it hides it all. And so now what I can do is I unhide it and then I give it a new name. So when I unhide slicer, this pulls up the slicer. I'm going to give it a more of a appropriate name. I'm going to call it the period slicer. You might be going, well, there's only one slicer on your page. Why do you want to rename it something? Well, what if I decide to add another slicer at some point in this process? Now I'm being very explicit of what I'm actually talking about. So now I'm going to unhide the next object. So it says basic student average. Let's see what that is. All right, so this is our column chart. So I'm going to rename this column category averages. All right, now let me unhide the next thing, which is the table. And so I'm going to put student individual grades. And then I'll call it a table as well. And then I'm going to unhide the next one. The next one was the image. Well, that image needs to be more specific. That's going to be my first period image. And I'm going to rename it first period image. The next one should be the second period image. So we unhide it here. And I'm going to rename it. So second period image. And finally, my last one is the button, which is fine. When it comes up, we see it's the all students. So I'm going to say the all students button. Now this might seem tedious at first, but hopefully this will make more sense once we start making the bookmarks themselves. So now let's make our first bookmark. And what we want to do is we want to have our first snapshot of what we want basically our end user to see. And so I think the first one would be good is if we saw all of the students, all of their averages, all of the categories. So for this one, I'm fine. I like all my buttons here. I like these two visuals, but I don't want the slicer to show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my slicer without making a selection. And then, so we see that the slicer works, right? Okay. So I'm going to unclick it just to make sure we're in business. It's working. But I don't want this slicer to show. And you might think, well, will that erase button do it for me? Will one of these other things, do I need to delete it? Nope. This is where we go to our selection pane. So I don't want the slicer to show. So I'm going to click on the eye icon next to period slicer. It is now hidden. So what can I do now? Now I actually make the bookmark. This is the bookmark for all of my students. You get to see every single thing. You know what, let me make these a little bit bigger down here so we can see that it goes down further. And make it a little bit nicer. There we go. All right, so we've got our first bookmark. Once we add it, I click add. And I now have bookmark 1. Well, bookmark 1 is an awful name, so I'm going to rename this. This is the all students view. So I'm going to rename this all students view. So I've made my first bookmark. Congratulations. Now I need to make the next bookmark. Well, the next bookmark is I want something to be just for first period. So I'm going to bring back that slicer in. And there are other ways of doing this. So you might be thinking, couldn't I have just done this with the filters pane? Yes, but I'm just showing you how bookmark images could not override, but take the place of a slicer and make it look a little bit more visually appealing. So now I'm going to click on first period. So I've filtered this all down to first period, which I like, but I don't want my end user to see that slicer up there. So I'm going to unhide it again, or I'm going to hide it again. So I'm here at the period slicer, going to hide it. So now this would be my first period view. So I'm going to add a bookmark. Bookmark 2. Don't like it, so let's rename it. I'm going to call this the first period students. And done. So now you can guess probably what we're going to do next. We need second period. We're going to get second period up there. Let's unhide our slicer. Let's click second period. So I now only see my second period students. Again, I don't want that to be visible to my end user, so I'm going to hide it. I'm going to add the bookmark, because now I like what I see for second period. And second period students. And just to show you, second period students, just to really make this obvious, all the visuals don't have to be the same when you make your bookmarks. They can be different visuals. I'm just only using 2 here, but we could have had, when we did second period, we could have had a line chart instead, and not a table, but maybe a donut chart showing the different categories, whatever it might be. But just to show that we could have done that, for second period, I'm going to make this visual even larger. I'm going to have it take up the whole space, just so we see the differences. Now, I've changed this, but I haven't updated my bookmark yet. So if I go back to second period students, it would go back to the original of what it looked like, where this column chart was a little bit smaller. So if I want to update a bookmark, the way you update a bookmark is you come over to the ellipses next to your bookmark, you click on it, and then you click on update. And we click on update, and it should be good. Now, how can we test that our bookmarks are working? Well, we actually click on them. So we click on all students view, and we see that it's all students, first and second period. First period students, we see that it's only first period. And then second period students. We see only our second period students. So with doing this, we see that the bookmarks work based on how we are clicking all of our different options here. Now, what we don't have is we don't have these clicks are only happening in our bookmarks pane, but we want our end users not going to see the bookmarks pane. We don't want them to. We want them to actually click on the buttons themselves. So we have one last thing to do, and we have solved our problem. So how we give our buttons or our images action is we actually click on them. So I'm going to click on first period. And then if we come over to usually where your visualizations pane is, it now says format image. And what we need to do is we need to give it some action. So we turn the action to on, and now we have lots of options. And what we want this one to be is a bookmark. So the type is going to be a bookmark. And then so you can say, okay, you've got a few bookmarks. Which one do you want it to go to? So we've got the first period image selected, so I want it to go to the first period bookmark. And that's all we've got to do. We could add a tooltip here. So let me just show. If I put click for first period students only, when I come over and hover over first period, it's going to give them that nice little tooltip to let them know what this is going to do. Now if I hover over second period, I've got nothing. So let's give second period its action. So I've got second period image selected. I'm back at the format image. I'm going to come over to the image action, turn it on. The type I want it to be is a bookmark. I want it to go to second period students. Now notice this time, I'm not going to put in a tooltip. If I hover over here, I don't get anything. Now, you're getting this tooltip of control click here to follow link. This is only in the desktop view. When you publish this to the service, that tooltip won't be there. It'll just be intuitive of clicking. But when you're in the desktop, you can't just do a regular click. You have to do a control click to go to the actual bookmark itself. And let me demonstrate that. So let's say I want to go to first period. So normally you would just click, but you have to do a control click on the desktop. So control click. And now I've got my first period students. So the only one we don't have is my all students. So I've got the all students, which is a button. Same thing over here. We're going to go to this one now. It's back to the visualizations pane because it's a different kind of object. And we need to still turn the action on. So we're going to turn action on. The type is going to be a bookmark. And the bookmark we want it to go to is the all students view. And so now, if everything is working appropriately, when I click on all students, I see all students. When I click on first period, I click on first period. And when I click on second period, I now see second period. One thing to note with bookmarks is if you know about cross-filtering, so let's say I'm on the second period bookmark, I click on homework. So now this is going to filter down my table just down to homework only. So you might be going, oh great, this is wonderful. Now I want to see just first period's homework scores because that's how this is being filtered down. But when I click on first period, it goes back to the original snapshot in time. So bookmarks will not respect selection choices on visuals. All right, it respected our slicer controls, but it does not respect your cross-filtering or highlighter selection controls of visual to visual. So again, could all this been accomplished by using a slicer? You bet. But can we make it a little bit more visually appealing to our end users by adding these bookmarks into them? Yes, I think we can. And then again, if I was really being good about this, and just to show you, when I made this, let's just do it for the first one. When I made the all students view here, and I had this slicer, which is way up there, that's a waste of real estate. So I really would have put the all students right on top of it. All right, and so what I would have done is I would have hid the all students button to start with. I would have used the slicer to make my selection, and then once I'm done, I would bring back the students button and then put the slicer as being hidden. So that way we've just saved real estate by putting all this up here because the slicer is never going to be visible to anybody. So I hope this has helped out. Real quick look at bookmarks. Later down the road, I'll do a little bit more of an advanced demonstration with bookmarks in order how do we have it respect those slicer selections and the cross filtering by using some things up here called, if you haven't noticed, these different options of check data, display current page, and all visuals. That will be a follow-up video later in the series. But for now, I hope this was helpful.